Good morning, everyone. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tab. Happy Thursday. I think it's Thursday. I don't think it's Friday yet. But you know what? We're almost there, aren't we? We're almost there. Just me today. No Colonel Adams joining us this morning. If there's something new going on, he might pop in tomorrow to join us. Thankfully, he was able to join us yesterday. Good. You know what? Good morning, Carl. I am still baffled. You know what? I need to go on YouTube early in the morning like you do. I don't even know how. I don't even know how you are there so early. You know what? I'm going to try something new today with comments, by the way. So we'll see how this works out. Good morning, Rob. How are you doing this morning? Good to see you. Also, lots to talk about today. I We'll see. I'm still dealing with this cold. I might have to cut things short because it's really hard to talk. It may not sound like it, but I have a really sore throat. I don't know what it is. I think it's just this cold going around. I took a bunch of vitamin C last night. My mom has it. Some other members of my family have it. I think we're all just kind of passing it around. But either way, so some of the things we're going to talk about today. Of course, the House passes the Save Act, kind of a by the we pass the. Of course, it's going to pass the House. But here's the thing: why is it that Democrats always say that it's racist to ask for voter ID? So we're going to talk about that. To me, it's racist to say that Black people, and that's literally what they're saying, is that Black Americans don't have identification. And as a matter of fact, there was one of the representatives. She was confronted by a reporter who said, "Oh, 76% of Black Americans said they supported voter ID," and she's like, "Oh, that can't be. I don't know what you're reading that, but that can't be." So we're gonna jump into that. Good morning, Linda. Good morning, Vernon. And good morning, Karen. And let's see here. Yes, Carl, you certainly are amazing. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Eric Schmidt's Protect America Act. And we're going to jump into a few different things today. And I don't want to forget my topics, so I'm kind of going over them. Usually I don't write them down, but I've had a very busy morning already today. I want to talk a little bit about SSRIs, serotonin uptakers, because, there's a lot of folks who take a lot of different medication for depression and a lot of other things. And I'm not saying anything against those people who need to take those different medications. But as you know, we had that shooting yesterday in British Columbia where 24 people were killed. I mean, 24. This is going to be one of my days where there were a total of I believe it was 10. Was it 9 people killed? One was the shooter, and then 7 were students, or a mom, a dad. I guess I should get my facts straight before I come on. I'll get it straight by the time we get to it. Like I said, I'm a little bit distracted this morning, but hey, we'll get there. We're going to talk about Nancy Mace, what she has to say about the cover up with the Epstein files, ghost trucks in Georgia. Well, I don't know if you guys saw those explosive videos yesterday between Massie and Bondi. That was absolutely insane. And of course, we're going to update on the Nancy Guthrie case. I am completely distracted today. I hope I get it together at some point during the show. It is just going to be one of those days. I've got a lot going on today. I've got a lot of work to do when we're done with the show. Good morning, Linda. Good morning, Kim. Good morning, Carl. Good morning, Drew. And Drew says Pam Bondi is a pedo protector. I don't know, Drew. I'm not so sure that I'm going to disagree with you on that one. Since you brought it up, we'll just talk about that first. It is a weird, it is kind of, I don't know what's going on with my light here. It is a weird situation. There's no question about it. If you saw what took place in Congress in the hearings, they were, as you probably know, both Democrats and Republicans went in and they were able to view the unredacted Epstein files, including the worst of the worst. I mean, it was the worst of the worst, where they talked about murder, where they talked about victims, where they were able to see the victims' faces and hear the victims' stories. And they talked about all of the really dark stuff that came out. And I think a lot of people were pretty horrified by it. But what's even crazier is we have, of course, Nancy Mace. She did an interview with Piers Morgan, and she said, it's the greatest cover up in history. I'm going to play a little clip of that for you here in just a moment. But can you imagine? We all know the Epstein files exist. It was an investigation. We all know there are women who were, some of them young girls at the time, and they were victimized. Of course, some of them sexually assaulted, others, just trafficked to various men. It was a very bad situation. Then you add in some of the other horrific stories we're hearing where homicides occurred. There was some really terrible things that happened to some of these people. And then you hear some of these hearings, and then you hear Pam Bondi, who is very upset. It's obvious in her voice. She's upset. She's upset with Massie. Now, Massie, I do have to say, it's kind of funny because just yesterday I was thinking, why does everybody hate Massie, Thomas Massie? I'm like, I listen to him. A lot of what he says makes sense to me, not on all topics. And then I heard that he voted against the Save Act, which made no sense. As a matter of fact, I think he was one of two, the Republicans that voted against it. And I'm like, well, why would he vote against that? Is there something in there that we don't know about? It didn't really make any sense to me. But he and Bondi were going at it, at it, at it. And kind of at the end of all this, he made a statement afterwards where he, told Bondi that the next attorney general, United States Attorney General, is going to arrest her. And, I've always liked Bondi. And I know I understand why Trump appointed her to that position. Obviously Donald Trump having Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach and Pam Bondi, of course, being so pivotal in Florida as the attorney general there. So I certainly understand why he, wanted her to be in this position. But when it comes to these Epstein files, it's just been weird from the beginning. How many times on this show have we talked about how strange it is? Because remember when they all came out with those big binders and we're all like, oh, there it is, the files, we're going to find out some information. And then we find out it was nothing. It was the same stuff that was released back in the early 2000s. As a matter of fact, there was more released back then that was unredacted than what they released recently, in that first file dump that was just a big nothing. And it was kind of funny because they're all out there with their little binders jumping around. One guy actually did this like jump in the air. He was so excited. Oh, we got the information, the Epstein file phase 1 right here in our notebook. And it was literally nothing. It was all the same stuff we saw before, all redacted. And I had actually saved files from back in the day that had more information than in that. And let's see, Michael says Bill Barr's connections to Epstein raise serious questions about institutional accountability. His ties to Epstein's early years and legal representation cast doubt on the integrity of past investigations. Discover how transparency efforts could reshape these narratives. Yeah, Michael and I have been Facebook friends for a very long time. If he's got anything to say, just go with it. he's posted a link here. I would suggest that you click on that link and follow what Michael has to say, because I can tell you he is probably right on point. Carl says, I don't trust Bondi. That said, people comment online like they think Bondi sat down with a pencil and redacted 3 million documents herself. Correct. She did not do the redactions herself, but she probably did oversee it. Jay says both sides are complicit and nothing will ever happen because of the high level people involved. Of course I agree. Judy says, whoops, I didn't mean to give you a thumbs up. That was a slip of the finger. Okay. I'm not sure what that means, Judith. And let's see here. Andrew, of course, back to Bondi being a pedo protector. It is. It's a weird situation. It's a weird situation. Jay says Bondi is following others. I am emboldened to no one. Yes, do I support Donald Trump? Yes. And I always have. I've said many times on the show, I consider myself one of his first supporters. Back in 1999, I was out in the year 2000 handing out Trump for president buttons. I met Donald Trump during that time in the city of St. Louis when I was asked to I was such a big supporter of Donald Trump for president back in 1999. I was asked to come to the some type of press deal that was held at the Hyatt back there. It was called the Omni. And I was able to meet Donald Trump, and I presented him with a Trump for President 2000 button. And I still have, I think, 2 of those buttons left. So I presented that to him. And he was very gracious, very nice guy. Saw him and Anthony Robbins. They were traveling with, of course, Bill Clinton at the time for the Results 2000 tour, which was something of Anthony Robbins' deal. They were all 3 traveling together, and I got to meet them all. So that was, or I didn't meet Bill Clinton, I should say. I met Anthony Robbins, Tony Robbins, and Donald Trump again afterwards. And just as nice as could be. I've always believed that our country should be ran as a company. That's really all it is to me. It's not about Donald Trump, the reality TV star. I never watched any of his shows. I don't like everything he says. I don't always like his tone. I think sometimes he can be very childish. I think he is his own worst enemy at many times, but I don't think that he's a pedophile. I think he's a womanizer. as I do believe every president we've ever had has been, or unless, of course, it's Obama. He might have been a manizer. I don't know. But, either way, I'm not emboldened to anyone. And therefore, if Donald Trump's name is somehow in the Epstein files, and we do find that he is in any way responsible for abusing women, victimizing women or young girls, then he needs to be called out too. But here's the thing, I don't expect that to happen. And the reason why I don't expect it to happen is because we haven't been told yet. There was an accusation, several years ago where a young girl who said that she was at a party that she was raped by Donald Trump. Now, later she redacted her story, but nobody ever talks about that. The fact that she recanted, I should say, recanted her story and said it wasn't true, that she was really just needing money. Her and her friend both kind of came up against Donald Trump. The friend ended up turning against the other girl and said, no, none of it was true. So and so, I can't remember her name. She's a drug addict and she was just looking for some quick money. But they recanted the story, and that was kind of the end of the deal there. Now, I do believe that if Donald Trump was truly involved at Epstein Island or the Epstein townhouse, or some of his other, he's got homes all over the place. And if he truly is a pedophile, if he truly did rape or sexually assault somebody, Democrats would be all over it. They would be all over it. We wouldn't be sitting here wondering, did Donald Trump do this? They would have proof. Donald Trump would probably be in prison. He would be the first person they'd go after and make an example of. And that has not happened yet. It hasn't happened yet. Jay says it would have already happened, under Biden if there had been anything. Right. How can anybody think that Biden would have, and Obama both, wouldn't have gone through their presidencies and not gone after Donald Trump, especially Obama, because Obama is really not related to Epstein. I haven't really seen any Obama Epstein connections. And I've kind of joked about it, and I am just joking that he's more of a Diddy guy. But but at the same time, Obama would have went after Donald Trump. There's been so many opportunities for people. Look at what they did to Donald Trump. Okay, they tried to bankrupt him. They tried to, and when they tried to bankrupt him, he still didn't back down. He still kept campaigning for president. Then they tried to charge him with various crimes, and did, quite honestly, charge him with various crimes. And still, he didn't back down. They did everything they could to go against him. When none of that worked, they attempted to assassinate him. Guess what? He still didn't back down. Now, if they're willing to go that far, don't you think they'd be willing to say, hey, Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. Here are the girls who, because a lot of these women are still around. Here are the women who testified against him. These are their stories. But none of that has happened. None of that has happened. And Virginia Guthrie, I know I probably never say her name right, she worked for Donald Trump. She is one of the people that Epstein, when Epstein used to go to Mar-a-Lago, that he pilfered from Mar-a-Lago and took with him back to work for him. She's one of the people, and she has always maintained that Donald Trump never did anything inappropriate when she worked for him. In fact, he tried to save her when she went to work for Epstein. So, I think all of the evidence says that Donald Trump's not in that file. However, Democrats don't want to believe that. You hear them constantly, Donald Trump's a racist. He's a pedophile. Yeah, I'm like, and some people actually believe he's been convicted for rape and pedophilia, which is even crazier. But yet, when I ask people, well, give us that information, show us your proof. They have no proof to show. You know why? Because there is no proof. But I'm telling you, if he is in the information, if Bondi is protecting Donald Trump because he is in the files for anything other than opposing Epstein or being a business associate, then you know what? We need to know about that. And look at Hakeem Jeffries. It just came out information yesterday. I posted it on social media. Hakeem Jeffries asked Jeffrey Epstein for money. Now, does that mean Hakeem Jeffries is guilty of rape or pedophilia? No. It means, but he did go to a convicted pedophile and ask him for campaign money. So he's still tied in, but if it were Donald Trump and Donald Trump was asking Epstein for campaign money, oh my gosh, what a different story, right? So we see how things go. And I'm sorry, but Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing. And it's kind of funny because Pam Bondi accuses Massie of having it. We got a couple videos here. I'm going to show you, first of all, what Nancy Mace has to say. Good morning, Karen. After she took a look at some of these files. Now I'm gonna zip through, if I can, Pierce
I want
Morgan
to
here.
put some names to you
We don't
that
necessarily need to hear
years
what
anything
Nancy has to say.
wrong, but owned
He's
by
just
a
talking about Howard
Pierce, that
Lutnick.
some of the names children.
owned
right.
by a convicted pedophile.
I would never do that as a mom. I want to protect children with every fiber of my being and would do that. But you would be shocked, Pierce, that some of the names that I have seen that came across the DOJ in emails that the DOJ is protecting. And we're talking about people on both sides of the aisle. We're talking about famous people, rich people, people in power, prime ministers, former presidents, et cetera, media personalities that are named in these files. And that's why I say this is going to go down as the greatest cover up, one of the greatest cover ups in American history. And I don't believe the girls are actually going to see justice, which is why it's going to be incumbent upon people like Democrat Ro Khanna, Republican Thomas Massie. I'm a Republican myself who's willing to name some of those names in our committee work, on the floor of the House, whatever it takes, because this kind of thing cannot continue to go on. I want to give the next girl hope that when she comes forward, she won't be shamed. Her life won't be smeared in the Daily Mail or whatever the next press, is going to do. What they do to female victims and to children is disgusting because they're protecting their rich and powerful friends. But you'd be surprised, shocked even at some of the names in the files.
There you have it, Nancy Mace, the greatest cover up in history. And I'm sure we all agree with her, because these files have been known for a very long time, yet there has never been accountability. So we've got to ask ourselves, will there ever be accountability? And, here in the United States, I don't know. Over in the UK, we're seeing a different story. We're seeing people resign, we're seeing hearings taking place. There could potentially be charges filed over in the UK against some of these people. People are talking about Keir Starmer, of course, Prime Minister, stepping down because of his connection to Epstein. Now, he claims he won't do that. And I'll tell you, if he does, that's going to be a whole separate story because the woman who is going to replace him is a very strong supporter of Sharia law. She is a Muslim who is in support of Sharia law being instilled, as the primary religion across Britain. So that's going to be a big deal if that happens. But Keir Starmer says, oh, he's not going to step down. There's nothing he did that was inappropriate. But I think we're going to see more accountability in the UK. Now, here in the United States, I don't know. What Pierce Morgan was talking about was Howard Lutnick. I believe he's the Commerce Secretary. And now the issue with him is that years ago, he claimed that he had no association with Epstein once he found out that he was a pedophile and all this other stuff. Well, then it turns out he actually lied. And he did, in fact, have lunch on Epstein Island. Now, he claims that he was with his wife, his 4 kids, their nannies, multiple nannies, and that they were already on a boat. They were in the area. Epstein asked to meet. So they were obviously in connection. He took his entire family to Epstein Island. They had lunch. They were there for an hour and they left. So that's what Pierce Morgan is talking about. And is that acceptable? In my opinion, no. When somebody is a known pedophile, they've been convicted of being a pedophile. No, you cut associations with them when you work for the United States government. Now, you in your personal life, a lot of people do know convicted pedophiles and convicted sex offenders. If you have a friendship, relationship, family member, and you still want to continue talking to that person, that's on you. But when you work for the United States government or you're running for office, that's a skeleton in your closet that you probably don't want revealed. And that's what's happening with Howard Lutnick right now. And there's a lot of others. I mean, that's just mild. That's very mild. I mean, we're hearing these stories about George Bush and some of George Bush, the first George Bush, and what he did, and some of the accusations against him are pretty horrific. And according to Nancy Mace, it involves celebrities, several former presidents, several people on both sides of the government, both Democrats, both Republicans, and I have no doubt that all of that is true. And will there be accountability? I doubt it. I highly doubt it. But we have Thomas Massie who says that he's going to release the names. He doesn't care what Pam Bondi says. He doesn't care what anyone else says. Donald Trump very upset with him. And a lot of people think that Donald Trump is upset with Thomas Massie releasing these names because his name is in the files and he doesn't want his name released. But we've seen, and then of course there's a lot of people on the flip side who are going to say, well, Donald Trump's name was redacted, it wasn't included, but his name is in the files many times, in fact, but never tied to actually harming anyone. I watched a victim account talking about Donald Trump, and I've talked about this on the show before. She's one of the victims. She calls herself a victim that came forward, and she said that she was intimidated by Donald Trump because Donald Trump was in the same building, office building, as Epstein. She was waiting for Epstein. She was going to interview with Epstein to be a secretary. And she had been out running. Okay, so this girl says she was coming in to interview to be a secretary, but she'd been out jogging. So she had shorts on and a tank top waiting for her interview, in the lobby. And Donald Trump walks up. She's sitting down. He's standing up. He walks up and he says, have you been helped? Is there anything that we can do to help you? And she freaked out, she said, because Donald Trump was looming over her. Okay, well, he's what, 6'4"? She's sitting down. She's very tiny and petite. And that is the worst thing Donald Trump did, is he walked up to her and he asked her if she needed any help. And then he left. She said some ignorant things to him. And then he walked away. And that's like her entire witness testimony. Like, oh, Donald Trump intimidated me because he stood above me and he was towering over me. And I was so scared because we were in the lobby alone. I would like to ask her, if I were going to, use her as a witness and ask her some cross questions. I would say, hey, why are you wearing short shorts and a tank top to a job interview? Why are you here after 6 p.m., after business hours, to meet with Epstein? So there was just something weird about that account altogether. And Drew says, why would you take your family to visit a pedo? I would like to know, Drew, also. I'm not protecting Howard Lutnick. I think he should step down. I think anyone, quite honestly, who is listed in the Epstein files, once he was a convicted pedophile, after that time, before that, people may not have known. But once he was convicted, anybody who met with him, associated with him, took money from him, had business dealings with him, they should step down. They really should step down. I don't care who they are, if they're Republicans or if they're Democrats, because people are calling for Howard Lutnick to step down. Well, if he steps down, then everybody should. Every single person. I don't care how many people they are. If they're celebrities, they need to retire. If they're business owners, they need to give it up. if they're working for the United States government or governments in other countries, then hey, they need to step down. Is that how it should be? I mean, I personally think so. I'd be perfectly fine with that. And if Donald Trump, we find out, did associate with Epstein in any way after we knew he was a pedophile, then he should follow suit. I mean, he should step down as well. I don't think that's going to happen, because I don't think we're going to see any information whatsoever that Donald Trump associated with Jeffrey Epstein once he was convicted as a pedophile. So I don't see that happen. Now, here we have Thomas Massie. I'm not going to play this whole video. It's only a minute long, but quite honestly, it's very difficult to watch. He and Bondi are just going at it. And man, Bondi has some attitude. She is not intimidated, and she is not backing down.
In an FBI document. Do you have that kind of accountability?
I believe Wexner's name was listed more than 4,000 times.
Yeah, I already told you that. This is where he's listed as a co-conspirator.
Can I finish my answer? Come on, let me finish my answer. We corrected that within 40 minutes. He was already, you're acting like everybody's trying to cover up Wexner's name.
Reclaiming my time.
I'm going to answer this question.
Reclaiming my time.
Mr. Chairman. This is how this works.
Can I have my time back? Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady can give her answer. The time belongs to the gentleman from Kentucky.
All right, I'm reclaiming my time.
Can I give my answer?
So
Yes.
I'm going to put the language of the bill up on the screen.
Chairman,
Because I
may I
have
give my
another
answer
question.
on that?
Here's
It's a political
the question.
joke, and I need to give my answer on that.
We'll let the Attorney General respond, and then the gentleman can move to his next question.
It's my time.
Within 40 minutes, you asked me a question.
You can give
Within
me-
40 minutes, Wexner's name was added back.
Within 40 minutes
You
of me catching you red-handed.
There was one redaction out
Where
of
he's
over
listed as a
4,700,
co-conspirator.
Okay.
and we invited you in.
Gentlemen.
This guy has Trump derangement syndrome.
I had a little bit of an internet blip there. My internet was out last night. Hopefully that doesn't happen again today. There's some type of area-wide outage that was taking place. But anyway, so here's the thing. Pam Bondi absolutely does seem very defensive there. And I do think that Pam Bondi may be guilty of redacting information about certain individuals. I do. And that's common, that's not unusual. Any attorney general in her position would probably be doing the same thing. And it's a political thing. We all know how it works, right? You cover for certain politicians and certain people. Now, Wexner, as you probably know, he is the owner of Victoria's Secret. He is a very, big billionaire. He's invested in a lot of different projects. He's a big contributor to various campaigns. And he is listed as a co-conspirator. Co-conspirator. That's a pretty big deal. So he's not just somebody who is meeting these girls. He's not just somebody who's had relations with some of these girls and women. He is a co-conspirator. He led women to Jeffrey Epstein is what he's being accused of. And so therefore he should be the next person charged. And in my opinion, he should be right up there behind Maxwell, who is also a co-conspirator. So why that's not happening, I don't know. I don't blame Massie for being upset that Wexner's name at some point was redacted. And then he had to tell them, hey, where's Wexner's name? It was here, now it's gone. Let's get it back in the files. Let's make it obvious that he is listed as a co-conspirator. Now, there's the flip side of this where a lot of people are saying, well, these files and these emails were in the hands of investigators for a long time. Some of these emails could be fabricated. Then we have Epstein, who is playing all these games. I mean, this guy was a real piece of work, playing all these games. We don't know who he was working for. We don't know who he was working with. There's a lot of talk that he had and I've heard that there is some video evidence, but I haven't heard a lot of talk about that. But there's a lot of talk that he did lure various important people, whether they're celebrities, whether they work for the government, etc., into his island, into that townhouse where most of the assaults occurred at the townhouse, I'm hearing, not actually the island. A lot happened at the island, but most of it took place at the townhouse. And so he was luring people there, setting them up, kind of, again, Diddy style, having some cameras recording what they're doing, and maybe using it for blackmail, maybe using it for extortion. We really don't know. But he doesn't seem like a very intelligent person. If you've seen the way he writes, he doesn't even capitalize. And it's hard to believe that so many people looked up to him for financial advice. So there is something more to the story that maybe we just aren't getting yet. There's something more to the story. And I had posted that photo of Epstein with Hakeem Jeffries, and you can see in the background, everyone has a suit on. And somebody pointed it out on that post that here you go, you have Epstein sitting there. Everybody has a suit on, but he's just got a button-up shirt on. You can't see what he's wearing, but probably jeans, but he's just got a very casual button-up shirt. And they said the guy's got a lot of gall, to come to this big event. Everybody's wearing a suit, but he's wearing his button-up shirt and very casual. But that seems like the type of person he was. If he was somebody that I've never, of course, met him, he wouldn't be somebody I would like. I can tell you that right now. Good morning, Annette. And Carl says, what's your plan B for comms when your net and phone go down? Well, Carl, that's a topic for another day. Maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow, because I had that conversation last night because all the internet service was down in my entire area. And it was kind of funny. As some of you know, my brother lives on the property in a house out back where there's a log cabin here on the property. And he came in and he's like, the internet's out. I'm like, I know, it's like a big area wide. We're in a rural area. So when one goes down, it's all down. And he was bored out of his mind. And I'm like, well, what would you do if we got struck with an EMP attack? Anyway, story for another day. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Come on, Carl. And anyway, so back to Epstein, we'll see how all this plays out as usual. I don't know what's going to happen. Are we going to see any accountability? I don't know. But one thing is, if anybody out there thinks that Donald Trump's name is listed in the Epstein files and Pam Bondi is trying to protect him, please, if you can find that information, show it to me. I have pleaded with people for so long, show the information to me. Because if you show it to me and it's valid, hey, I'll be right there with you. I'll say, hey, Donald Trump needs to step down. If he has abused these young girls, these women, if he's involved in trafficking, absolutely he would need to step down, just like anyone else. But you know what? It's not going to happen because those documents don't exist. But you know what? People need to be prosecuted. And I don't like it when people say, and so many people message me and they say, stop talking about Epstein. People I'm friends with and people I know, Stop talking about Epstein. It's over. It's done. Let's move on to other topics. It's not done. It's not over. Yes, we might get tired of talking about it. We might get frustrated because we keep hearing all these important people are in the files, but nobody tells us who these important people are, right? No one pays attention to the victims. These victims don't have accountability, but that's exactly why, in my opinion, we can't ever let it go. You know, we don't want to talk about it every day, maybe not even every week, but I do think it's something that should be on that front burner to where we do bring up from time to time and we say, hey, if there's updates, let's talk about the updates. Is there accountability? Then let's talk about that accountability. And I still am a firm believer that those names need to be released. If there are names in that file, I don't care who they are. I don't like anyone in Congress for the most part, whether they're Republican or Democrat. So it doesn't matter to me. If it blows the whole thing up, good. Because, you know, I've said for many years now that we need to wipe the slate clean. We need to start over because everyone in Congress, I don't care what side of the fence they're on, I would say 99% of people in Congress, if not 100%, they are there to make money off of your tax dollars. And they're there because they want to be bankrolled by you. And I know people get into it for the right reasons. I know they do. But then they're there. They learn how to play the game. They realize the, you know, insider trading, how much money they can make on insider trading. They see and they're approached by these lobbyists who want to give them a lot of money for supporting different types of bills, you know, that of course end up making money for these different corporations. We know that they're all establishing these NGOs, right? They had to hurry up and do that before Donald Trump took office. They all got their NGOs established so that we, the taxpayer, instead of them stealing our money outright, they just funneled it into these NGOs thinking maybe we wouldn't see it, thinking they're pulling the wool over our eyes. But of course we did find out. Now we know. And I'm ready to get rid of all of them. I really am. I'm ready to wipe the slate clean. We better get some term limits passed. I keep seeing all these bills, you know, coming through the House, but I don't see anything about term limits. And I think we all know why. Annette says, yes, I agree. Files need to come out. Yes, they do. Oh, it's okay, Carl. I always make my way back. So don't you worry about that. And Drew, they wouldn't say that if it happened to their child. I agree, Drew. You know, Drew's been a long time listener of whatever show I've been on. And I agree with Drew in this. And always when it comes to the Epstein files, I agree with Drew because I really do think we all want the same thing. We all want accountability for these victims. We all want the perpetrators to be punished, right? That's what, I mean, if you're a Christian conservative in particular, you think that all criminals should be punished, right? You commit the crime, you do the time. Isn't that how it works? And there's no different with the Epstein files. And quite honestly, to me, I don't care how powerful someone is. I don't care if it turns this country upside down. Maybe that's what we need. I'm not worried about any of that stuff. I'm not in the files. No one I know is in the files. I'm not too worried about that. But if somebody out there is accountable, then hey, that'll make things so much better. Some of the other things we want to talk about, the SAVE Act, you know, I hear, Drew, since you're here, this is something for you. I'm curious, Drew. Drew is a Black American. All right. Drew, do you have a driver's license? Do you have a state ID? I know you do because you used to work for the city of St. Louis. And I know you used to drive one of those white trucks around. Now, what's interesting about the SAVE Act, there's other things in the SAVE Act. We know the SAVE Act passed through the House. 2 people voted against it. Massie was one of them. I'm not sure who the other one was. And the SAVE Act is about largely about voter ID, right? The SAVE Act is about voter ID. And Drew says, Democrats or Republicans, I don't care. Agreed, Drew. And so the SAVE Act is about voter ID. We all know, what do we want? We should all want this, whether you're Democrat or Republican. You should want secure elections. You absolutely should want secure elections. You should want to be able to go to your polling place, show an ID, cast one vote, and that's your vote, right? That's how it should be. That's how it should always be. But we know that's not happening. We know there's ballot harvesting, you know, there's mail-in votes, there's all different kinds of ways people do things. If you go to your polling place, even in states where they say voter ID is required, if you go into the polling location, you say, well, I don't have an ID. They just have you sign an affidavit to say, okay, this is me. I don't have an ID. I'm legally signing this form. I know I can be prosecuted if I'm found to not be this person, but who's going back to look? You know, who's going back to look? And they say, oh, well, they check signatures. They can't really check signatures. You know, I know me. I don't know if this is strange for me or if other people are like this. I know some people who sign a document and it's the same every single time. It's always their signature. You could recognize it anywhere. I am not one of those people. My signature looks different every single time I sign it. And so if I were to go and fill out one of these affidavits and they went back and checked it against some other signature, it would definitely not be the same, especially if they're checking it against, a signature I might have put on a voter registration card. It's not going to be the same. My signature is different every single time that I sign it. Why that is, I don't know. Maybe I'm psychotic or got some other weird thing going on, but it's always different. Jay says you have to have ID for everything except voting. It's just common sense. Exactly, Jay. Exactly that. You have to have ID if you're going to buy cigarettes. You have to have an ID to buy lottery tickets sometimes. If you go to a casino and you win, guess what? You got to have an ID. You need an ID for literally everything you do. Most people in this country drink alcohol. Guess what? You have to have an ID. Some places ID people, at any age. Technically it has to be up to what, age 35, but there are certain places that ID you no matter what. You have to have an ID for everything. If you drive a vehicle, guess what? You have to have an ID. If you have a bank account, you have to have an ID. And for whatever reason, and I've never understood this, and all the years I've been alive, I've never understood the sentiment where Democrats want to say that Black people, Black Americans, cannot obtain identification. Now, some of them say, well, it's because they're poor and they don't have resources. They don't have a way to get a birth certificate. They don't have a way to get a social security card. Therefore, they cannot go into the DMV and get a state ID, or a driver's license. Well, you know what? There's a lot of white Americans too. The same issues where I don't know what's going on with my system today. Do you guys see anything strange going on? Something's happening. And my whole screen, my show screen just flashed. Jay says you can't even get a fishing license without an ID. You're right. I had to have my ID. I get a fishing license every year. One of my favorite things to do. And guess what? I have to have an ID to get a fishing license. And it's, to me, it is extremely racist for Democrats to say that Black people don't have identification. Therefore, it's not fair for us to have strict voter ID when it comes to voting because Black people don't have identification. It makes absolutely no sense to me. Every person in this country in this day and time has a way to get an ID. If you don't have a social security card, you can do this online, or you can go into the social security office. There's one in every big city. And if you don't have transportation, you can go online. You can go to a library and ask for help if you don't have an internet or if you don't have a computer. There are ways to get identification. There are groups you can call if you can't afford to get an identification that will help you. There is no excuse for not getting an identification these days. There's absolutely no excuse whatsoever. There is always a way to get ID. I don't care who you are, there's always a way to get ID. And in these days, in the time of the digital age, the same with your birth certificate, there are people who say, well, a lot of Black Americans, they were born at a time when we didn't have birth certificates for Black Americans. Not these days. I mean, not in, what is that, like less than 1% of our population here in 2026 may have been born at a time where they didn't have birth certificates. I mean, I've heard every argument there was. And then I heard a Democrat senator the other day being asked by a reporter, and she was giving them recent poll numbers. And she said, well, why are you voting against the SAVE Act? Because 76% of Black Americans that were polled said they also want voter ID. This woman would not even look at the polling number. She wouldn't even look at it. She said, that's not true. I don't have to see it, but that's not true. I don't know where you got that information, but that's not true. I don't understand it. I know a lot of Black people in my life. I have friends that are Black. I work with people who are Black. I know a lot of Black people. Every single one of them has an identification. In fact, they all drive. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't get it. I do not get it. And of course, Drew, he's not going to say a word when it comes to that because he knows I'm right. And Carl says, because generally the Democrats that are party talking heads are racist. They are. I know some of my Black friends are furious. They're furious when they hear Democrats say that they can't get an ID because of their skin color, because of their race. It infuriates them because they can do anything any white person can do. And of course they can go get an ID. I mean, come on, it's 2026. Everybody can get an ID these days, no question about it. So it is. It's frustrating. It's frustrating to me. I'm sure it's frustrating to everyone. And if I were a Black American, I would be standing up, and I'm telling you, I would be absolutely furious. I would. I would be absolutely furious. I'd be like, who's the racist here? I'd be like, if you tell me I can't get an ID or I'm not able to get a driver's license because I'm Black, who is the racist here? And, some of the other things I want to talk about outside of that, we're going to, just like everything else, we're going to keep an eye on that situation. The SAVE Act passing the House, we're one step closer. Voter ID in this country is one of the most important things we can possibly have. Jay says, the Coexist Party is the most racist group in the country. Why is that, Jay? Anytime I see a sticker on somebody's bumper or, it says coexist, I already know what's going on with that person. Good morning, Terry. And so Eric Schmitt, we're going to talk about Eric Schmitt's past. He's working to pass the Protect America Act. And let's see here. And Terry says, I work at the mill. My friends that are Black all have ID. They think that this is ridiculous because it is ridiculous. It's racist and it's ridiculous to think that a person just because they're Black cannot get identification. It is the craziest and most absurd thing I've ever heard come out of the Democrats' mouth. And I've been talking about this issue for probably 20 years. That's how long I've been talking about this exact same issue. And they still make it a point. Now, sooner or later, they're not going to be able to bring up that point anymore. I wish somebody would do a poll to say how many Black Americans have an ID, have a driver's license, how many white Americans have an ID or have a driver's license. I would like to know. And then what I'd like them to do is say, okay, let's compare it to some other people. There are people who come into this country as immigrants. Some are illegal, most legal. And there's a lot of people who do come into this country, even if they come here illegally, who literally do come from countries in which they do not have birth certificates. A lot of these third world countries, they have a family book. So when somebody is born, they write a name in that family book, but it's usually only the males. They don't even keep track of the females that are born in some of these countries. And they don't track birth records. They don't have IDs or driver's licenses or things that are required here in a country like the United States. And they come into our country, they have nothing. They have no documentation, which is why it's so difficult to vet some of these people. And in some countries, there are certain names that are very popular. So you might have a line of 100 people and 25 of them have the exact same name. And there's just no way to verify who these people are to vet them. But guess what? They still get an ID and they still get a driver's license, don't they? So there is absolutely zero excuse why any person in the United States right now cannot get a driver's license, cannot get an ID. Zero excuse. All right, so we're going to talk about Eric Schmitt and the passing the Protect America Act. I love Eric Schmitt, Missouri's own, of course, former Attorney General. And I haven't. Speaking of, our second Attorney General, Andrew Bailey. Now he's out working, of course, with the FBI. What is he, the co-deputy director, something like that, of the FBI? I haven't heard a lot about him there. I know he's working steadfastly, I'm sure, behind the scenes, but we've lost two good people to Donald Trump, but that's all right. Hopefully they'll do better job there. Carl says, can you even get a job with an ID? Carl, you just made the best point yet. And no, you cannot. I hire people. When you hire somebody for a job here in the United States, they have to fill out an I-9 form. And to fill out an I-9 form, you actually have to have two forms of identification. You have to have two forms of identification or a passport. So it could be one passport that'll serve as both forms of identification, or two forms of identification. It could be a birth certificate and a state ID, birth certificate, driver's license. If you're, somebody in this country on different types of passes, it could be a green card or different types of forms for non-residents. There's different things, non-citizens, I should say. There's different, all kinds of different documents there. But guess what? People have them. Very rarely do I run into somebody who doesn't have a document or doesn't have a way to go get their documents. Anyway, so Eric Schmitt's pass the, why can I just can't get this out today. I told you it's going to be a bad morning for the show for me. The Protect America Act, he's got the campaign going. He said, hey, Americans, get out, vote, do your thing when it comes to your election day, because we've got a lot to work on in this country. So he's kind of doing a two-parter here. He's saying, Americans, okay, you got to get out and vote, which is, of course, as we know, extremely important. Get out and vote, because you know what? We're going to have our local elections in a lot of areas coming up soon, some of them very, very critical. And then, of course, he wants the House and the Congress to pass the Protect America Act. And what this is, it is ending sanctuary cities, increasing penalties for illegal entry and re-entry, increasing penalties for assaulting law enforcement, and take on rogue NGOs. I mean, that sounds like a pretty winning project, in my opinion. Think about this. We can break this down. So, ending sanctuary cities, obviously, highly important. That should be really one of our number ones, or these are all number ones, by the way. Ending sanctuary cities. I think that'll solve a lot of problems right then and right there. And increasing penalties for illegal entry and re-entry. You know, Donald Trump's working on that. Obviously, people who enter the country illegally who are caught, of course, are deported. But we do have a lot more work to do when it comes to that. We really need, even though we're doing a good job with these deportations, we still need a good immigration reform program. And then, of course, increasing penalties for assaulting law enforcement. I mean, here's another thing that I don't understand the difference between Democrats and conservatives, or I should say liberals and conservatives, or Democrats and Republicans, is why is it that if you belong to the Democrat Party, not everyone, there's certainly a lot of Democrats who are all for supporting law enforcement, but let's just say a lot of people on the far left, for whatever reason, they are against law enforcement for the most part. They do not want protections for law enforcement. And as we can see in these various videos in these different cities going on across the country right now with these violent protests and riots, what's happening? Law enforcement officers are being assaulted every single day. They're being pelted with rocks, concrete boulders at times, frozen water bottles, you name it, hit with umbrellas, everything imagine. And it's terrible. And we absolutely do need to step up and protect our law enforcement. No question about it. Now, I haven't heard what Eric Schmitt has in mind, what type of additional penalties they might receive. I don't know what is going on. The show keeps flashing on and off. So I'm going to try to hurry up and get through things before something happens. I think that's people reporting me. For whatever reason, people think if they report the show, that Facebook's going to take it down and do something, and it'll cause it to blip a little bit, because that's Facebook's algorithms trying to catch up and make sure we're not doing anything or saying anything we shouldn't say. So if you see any blips, it's probably just that. Every day I've been getting reported. I get these little reports from Facebook about how many people reported me. It's kind of funny. So obviously increasing penalties for assaulting law enforcement, huge deal. Take on rogue NGOs. You know, I think that goes without saying. We've talked for a long time now that these NGOs, it's a big problem. They're taking your tax dollars and they're funding these NGOs. The money goes from the NGOs back into the pockets of, guess what, Congress, people who are already very wealthy who don't need your money. And but they're going to take every penny they can get, won't they? So I am all for getting rid of these rogue NGOs. So that's Eric Schmitt. Keep an eye on that. That is the Protect America Act. Should be number one on our list of things we need to do, things we need to keep track of, and we will keep track of it, absolutely. Something else I want to talk about is ghost trucks. You know, we're kind of already on this path. I'm going to give some updates about the Nancy Guthrie case. I think that's important just because it is such a big topic right now in the United States. It's a story I've been following very closely. I follow all these cases pretty closely. I don't always talk about them, but I'm big on watching crime and people who are abducted or missing or various homicides. So I always follow those cases. I just don't always talk about them. But, you know, I think that there could be a Trende-Aragua tie, and we're going to talk about why that's the case here in just a moment. Jay says assaulting ICE without repercussions will lead to other branches being assaulted. Of course it will. Anytime people are allowed to assault law enforcement and there's no repercussions, guess what's going to happen? They think it's their right to assault law enforcement. I feel like we're kind of in that space anyway, aren't we? You know, we have all of these people, you know, officers pull them over. I mean, I wouldn't have the patience for that. And there's people, they roll their windows up. I'm not showing you my ID. It's my right to not show you my identification. Well, they're wrong. They've been misled, of course, by Democrat leaders, and they're wrong. Yes, you do have to show your ID if you're pulled over. You know, if we can go down that road another day, because that's going to send me off on a whole other tangent. But yes, we already know how law enforcement officers are treated already. So I want to jump in and talk about ghost trucks. You know what a ghost truck is? There's right along the Georgia-Florida border, there is a way station. So trucks are coming through from Georgia as they head into Florida. When you go through this area, of course, Florida has a very strict policy that if you're driving a truck, a semi-tractor trailer, and you go through this way station, they're going to check. They have people there checking. Do you speak English? Do you read English? Are you a citizen? If you cannot speak English, if you cannot read English, if you are not here in the country legally, you have to abandon your truck. You are immediately taken into custody and you have to abandon your truck. And now there's this situation going on right there along the Georgia-Florida line where there's this whole group of abandoned trucks. And some of the truck drivers are getting frustrated over it because they say it's dangerous for them. They're driving through, there's all these trucks pulled over. They don't have anywhere to pull over or even stop. Of course, they're worried they're going to hit one of them. Eventually, somebody comes around and tows them away. But think about this. What's in the trailers of these trucks? I'm going to show you a video here in a second. What kind of products are they hauling back and forth? What happens to that product? Does the company owner come out and get it? Is the company owner too worried they're going to get in trouble, for hiring somebody who's in this country illegally or who can't speak or write in English and so forth? So therefore, these trucks are just left there and they're calling them ghost trucks. And I've got a video of that here. You're going to take a look at this. Well, hopefully.
I like to thank the Agriculture Center coming out of Florida, going into Georgia. Look at there. Got that one. Got that one. Look at all these trailers. They shut all these drivers down because they could not speak English and confiscated all these trailers, had their tractors towed, leaving it up to the brokers or the company to come get the trailers. Thank you, ICE, for doing your job. Appreciate you, Ag Center.
That's wild, isn't it? Now, eventually, the companies do come and pick them up or the state tows them. And, I don't know where they're towing them to, but that's a lot of product that's probably not making its way to wherever it is supposed to be delivered. Now, of course, we can't see who those trucks are or what the companies are, but that's pretty wild, isn't it? Ghost trucks all over the Georgia-Florida line. I thought that was pretty wild when I saw that. Carl says, good for Florida. Yeah, Florida is really leading the states when it comes to this situation. And they're very strict with their policies that if you're not a United States citizen, if you're not here legally, you don't have to necessarily be a citizen, but you have to be here legally. If you don't have your CDL, if you don't have the ability to write or speak English, you're not allowed to drive a truck. And in fact, they're really not just Florida, but the entire United States is stepping up those policies because really, that's really a policy all across the country. Florida is just one of the main states that's actually going after people, stopping people, making them leave their trucks behind. But here in the United States, there's a big push that if you don't speak or you don't speak or write English or read English, that is, then you can't be driving these big trucks. And I don't have the tip line here. I saw it. I saved it the other day. I don't have it for the show, but there is a tip line now, and it's called, I can't remember. It's like the truck safety line or something like that. They call the tip line. You can look that up. And they're saying that, hey, American, if you're out and you're on the roads, on the highways, and you see a truck driving on the highway, and it appears that the person driving this truck doesn't speak English or doesn't read English, or if you're suspicious about whether or not they should be driving this vehicle, if they look like they're driving it, not safely, then report them to this tip line. And I'm kind of a 50-50 on tip lines. And the reason why I think that can go rogue very quickly and it can be inundated. People are going to be calling if some truck cuts them off on the road, they're going to be calling and reporting this person on the tip line. We're going to be doing a lot of chasing around of people that don't necessarily need to be chased. So I'm not always in favor of these tip lines, but we'll see how it goes. If they get inundated with calls that truly have nothing to do with people who read or speak English or people who are in the country legally, we'll see how it goes. Carl says, I think he said he was northbound Florida into Georgia. I'm not sure, Carl, but I know when you read the story that goes along with the video, they were talking about how it is at the Georgia-Florida line, and those were trucks coming into Florida because Florida does not allow any driver to enter their state if they do not speak English, if they do not read English, because of course, it's an obvious concern. I don't have anything against people who speak another language. I really don't. As a matter of fact, I was somewhere not too long ago, and there was a guy came in, and he was Ukrainian, and he was here legally. He, had some type of pass where they gave him 6 months. No, I take that back. The government gave him a 2-year contract from Ukraine to come into the United States and work. And when he works consistently for 6 months, he's able to bring his family here, some part of some immigration deal with Ukraine over the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And while he did speak English, he was talking about how he's trying to really, really focus on reading English. He could speak English, but he was having a harder time reading it. And he even talked about how important it is to be able to read the road signs, because if you can't read the road signs, guess what? You could potentially have an accident. Carl says, I think he said he was northbound. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that already. All right, guys. So we're going to move on. Let's talk about what's going on in the Nancy Guthrie case, because it is important to talk about, because, this could happen to anyone. Take this as a case in point. It could happen to anyone. We talked about that yesterday with Colonel Joe Adams, and there is some new information on the case. Of course, Nancy Guthrie, she's an 84-year-old woman. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, who is, of course, a journalist, or I guess you call her an anchor on the Today Show. I have never once watched the Today Show. I've never once watched Savannah Guthrie. So I know about her town hall with Donald Trump. She was pretty evil in that town hall. That's about the only thing I know about her. And I had to be reminded of even that. So I wasn't aware who she is. But there are a lot of people who do know who she is. And of course, there's been a lot of focus on this case because of her and who she is. And of course, a lot of focus on the family in general. But more than anything, in my interest in the case is the fact that this could happen to anyone. It doesn't matter where you live. This could happen to anyone. And I know there's been a lot of focus, like we talked about yesterday, on Nancy's daughter, Annie, and her husband, Tommaso. They've been back to their house numerous times, collecting evidence, using luminol, taking out a little, what we're told, allegedly, a piece of drywall. But the reason why is because that is the last place Nancy was seen. On the night Nancy went missing, which was January, I believe that was Saturday, January 31st, she was at her daughter Annie's house. She took an Uber there. I believe that was a little after 5 o'clock. And they had dinner. They played some games. What kind of games? I don't know. And then one of them, where we believe it was Tommaso, drove Nancy back to her home. Well, the next morning, you probably already know the story. She was supposed to meet a group of friends to watch a church service. She watched the church service of her daughter, Savannah. Savannah lives in New York City, and she attends a church that has a virtual church service. So Nancy, they would meet at different friends' house. Nancy's house sometimes, different friends' houses as a group, and they would watch the live streaming of this church service that Savannah attended. And so they were supposed to show up. Nancy never showed up. Therefore, one of the women at this group contacted her daughter. Now, we're assuming that was Annie that she contacted. She contacted her daughter. Annie, her husband, rushed over to Nancy's home. They found Nancy was not there. They contacted police they made a 911 call about 6 minutes after arriving at Nancy's house. They would have arrived to have seen what we're understanding, the back door wide open, some blood on Nancy's bed, some other blood evidence within the home, some blood drops on the front porch. Of course, the Ring doorbell camera, it was a Nest doorbell camera, was gone. And I believe the cameras in the back may have been gone. But now since that time, and like we talked about yesterday, is that against all odds, of course, investigators were told that since Nancy didn't have a subscription, they were not able to obtain any of the images from those cameras. Now, from what I understand, the folks who work for Nest, some investigators worked, day and night to try to recover these images. And there's a whole technical explanation how they were able to do it. We're not going to get into that, but they were able to recover images. And so that's something that was new. We talked about that yesterday. Yesterday, I showed the video of that person. Now, here's the thing we're going to talk about in a second. There's either a second individual or the same individual on a different night. So I'm going to show you some photos. And trust me, it took me 30 minutes to get these photos loaded to the show. I don't have any problem loading videos, but it's really hard to add an image. But I worked at it till I got it done. And it was not easy. And let's see here. Carl says, I had to look her up after a few days of constantly hearing her name. What's a Today Show for $100? Alex, that's right, Carl. I had to look it up too. I'm like, it sounds familiar, but I don't know who she is. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's that lady in the town hall. So I got it. I don't watch television. So I definitely have never watched the Today Show. So anyway, but, there's some new information that came through yesterday. As you guys probably already know, the other day, we talked about this yesterday also, a person had been detained. Now, this person, his name was Carlos Palazuelos, I believe, and he was detained. They seized his telephone, his cell phone, and then they released him. Now, he is still being investigated. Just because they released him doesn't necessarily mean he's not involved. Now, he's given interviews. He says, hey, I didn't do it. I had nothing to do with it. I don't even know who Nancy is. Of course, anyone would claim that they don't know who she is or what the case was. He was a delivery driver for DoorDash and for FedEx, and he said he does do deliveries, in that general area. So he very well may have delivered some packages to her home. And so, they've seized his cell phone. So we'll find out if any more information about him is released. Now, yesterday, something new that happened is they found 2 black gloves that they do believe belong to the suspect. The first black glove was found about a half mile from Nancy's home. The second black glove was about a mile and a half away. So this is kind of weird, in my opinion. If you are the suspect and you don't want to get caught, do you start shedding off the items you wore and just randomly throwing them? If he's driving, throwing them out the window. There's a lot of talk that he was actually on foot, which, if that's the case, that's even stranger. And it's just turning into a really weird case, just a really strange case. And so they found these 2 gloves, and they do look like they were definitely a set. They were definitely a pair. They do believe they are the gloves that he was wearing. They did fast track those for DNA evidence. I expect they'll probably either already have that DNA evidence back or they will have it today. But is this person just playing games with them? It's kind of a bungled, whoever this was is not a very intelligent person anyway. It seems kind of bungled up in how they're doing. Oh, Mary says a white tent up now in front of the Guthrie house. Mary, which Guthrie, Annie or Nancy? I'm assuming Nancy. Jay says, I believe some information is purposely misleading to lure them into a sense of false security. Yeah, and Jay, that is something investigators will do. I don't think that investigators will waste resources to do that. They're not going to go to the daughter Annie's house and do all these investigations to make it seem like the investigation is focused on them. But them going to Annie and Tommaso's house doesn't necessarily mean they're guilty, because obviously they start with the family first. We've talked about that already on the show. They start with the family first. They started clearing family members. So if let's say they clear Savannah, she's not in town. Let's say she doesn't have any ties that they can find. They'll give her a polygraph test. She passes. Okay, she'll be cleared. So let's say they come to Annie and Tommaso. Okay, well, they can't prove where they were. Maybe their cell phones were off that night. They can't prove those cell phones connect them to their home overnight. Maybe they don't pass their polygraphs for whatever reason, and then they cannot be cleared. So if they can't be cleared, then investigators are going to look at them closely because they were the last people to not only see Nancy at their home, but one of them actually drove Nancy to her home. So that's going to, of course, raise suspicions of investigators. It does not mean they're guilty, but they will continue to investigate them until they can actually clear them. But a lot of other information is coming out now. Now, all of a sudden, we're seeing information that investigators are saying, well, actually, they are saying now today. Yesterday, they were saying, well, it could be more than one person. This morning, they're saying, no, we have persons of interest. We are investigating persons of interest, persons, not just one person, persons. And Jay says, this suspect on camera doesn't strike me as highly intelligent. I agree, Jay. I don't know if you were here yesterday. I completely agree. In the video, I didn't save the video to play today, but on the video, everybody has pretty much seen it at this point. This guy's like bumbling around. And I do think it's a guy. First, I was kind of questioning it. He's got pretty girl eyes, but so does my brother. So I know guys can have beautiful eyes, just like girls. If you saw my brother, he's dark complected. We're partly Native American, so my brother is very dark complected, and he has these beautiful thick eyelashes, and he's just got the most pretty brown eyes. And so and I, of course, was the blonde hair, blue eyed kid, and I have like blonde eyelashes. If I didn't wear mascara, you wouldn't even know I had eyelashes. So this person does have really pretty eyes, but I still think they're a man because they kind of carry themselves like a man. I'm going to show you some photos in a few seconds. But yeah, this guy, he comes up, like we said yesterday, he's coming up to the door. You know, any person in their right mind would have reasonable suspicion that there's going to be a doorbell camera. I mean, because that's what people have these days, right? They have doorbell cameras. Well, this guy walks up like he has no idea. I'm going to show you a picture of him now. He walks up on this like he has no idea. He's just walking up. Now he's got a ski mask on, you know, but see, here's the other thing too. You can see his weapon there in the front of him. You can see the black gloves, which they do believe are the gloves they found yesterday. This guy has on reflectors. Who wears reflectors to go commit a crime? And he has this ski mask on. Now he walks up to the camera, and when he goes up to the camera, he's like, oh, there's a camera there. Well, he runs back behind him and he grabs these flowers. I think they called them sagebush. He grabs this sagebush and he comes up to the camera and he tries to cover the camera with the sagebush, which is just dumb. I mean, it's really just dumb. You can see his eyes. I think they're using facial recognition. I said that yesterday on the show. And the reason why I think that is because if you go back to January 6th, they did use facial recognition and they were able to identify people on nothing more than their eyes, very similar to this guy here. There were people who had their entire faces covered other than their eyes, and they were able to identify him. So I do think the person of interest that they stopped the other day was somebody that facial recognition, you know, caught them by the eye. And if you've gone and you've gotten a driver's license or a state ID, you're in the facial recognition system. And so I think what they probably did is went back to that nationwide, you know, facial recognition system, put the image in of the guy here in the ski mask, and it probably just popped up anyone who had similar looking eyes that was a match. And they're probably working their way through those people. And I do think that's, no one has said that, but I do think that's what has happened here, because the person they detained, the only thing that they told him when they detained him was your eyes look like the guy in the mask. And Mary says she thinks it's Nancy. Well, Mary, you wouldn't be the only person who thinks that. I don't personally. Oh, at Nancy's house. I thought you meant something else entirely. Mary says, guy on video, not too intelligent, but have we not solved it yet? And yeah, I know. It's pretty crazy, isn't it? So that's the guy. Now here, I'm going to show you another image. Now here's what's so interesting. Is this is either a different guy or it's on a different day. Take a look at this. Now this was released by Fox National. Now that guy, in my opinion, I mean, it could be just because he's standing different, but if you look at him, this is completely different. This guy has on, still has the black gloves. I think this is on a different day. Now that's just me saying that. I think this is a different day, and I'm going to tell you why. That looks like a camouflage jacket. It looks like the same ski mask, or at least the same color. You know, the pants, it's hard to tell. These look like different shoes, because we're going to go back and toggle back and forth, okay? So you've got this jacket. That jacket is definitely not patterned or camouflage. Again, you see his weapon. It's really kind of hard to see the shoes. The other guy has black stripes on his shoes. It's really difficult to tell if this guy does, but you can see that's a completely different jacket. And I don't know if it's the same person or not. Then let's go back to this guy. This is a camouflage jacket. There's no question about it. That is camouflage. That is not the same jacket. It's just not. And if you look at his shoes, they have black stripes on his shoes. And so those either are different shoes or we can just see a better image of them. But either way, you can see he does not have a backpack on. He is wearing a completely different jacket. Now, the reason why I think that these were different days is because a lot of Nancy's neighbors have been given statements on social media. One of those neighbors came forward and they said that investigators came around to their home and they asked them for video footage from January the 11th between, I think it was 9 p.m. and midnight. And then, which is kind of odd that they would ask for that. And they asked for footage, any video footage from the 31st, which would be Saturday morning between, I think it was 9 a.m. and 11 a.m., because they saw somebody had, you know, a suspicious vehicle on camera at 10 a.m. on that Saturday morning. So they're wanting to talk about that. But now this could have been the same night, and it could be that just two different people were at Nancy's house if they were working together, because this is a view, as you can see from, it looks like anyway, Nancy's front doorbell camera. But this is definitely a different jacket. Whether or not it's a different person, I just don't know. Whether it's the same night or a different day, I don't know. But what I will tell you, and the reason why I'm wondering if maybe this is related to Trende Aragua, what they do in this country, and they are very prevalent in the state of Arizona, what they are doing here in our country is they are targeting wealthy people. And they have made millions of dollars targeting wealthy people. And what their MO is they come out in groups, sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 individuals at a time, and they dress very similarly to this. I've watched a ton of videos of Trende Aragua going to various people's homes, and they are always dressed in this way. And what they do is their goal is they target very wealthy people. They come in, and their goal is to take any valuables that they can find. Now, in this case, we've not been told if anything's missing. We've not been told. So we can't say that nothing was taken. We've just never been told. Not one time has investigators say nothing was taken from the home. So we just don't know. And it could be, and I know Jesse Waters last night on Fox, I saw a clip. He was talking about, is it possible that the guy with the backpack, you can see that backpack is just packed full. Was it filled with duffel bags so that they could come in as a group, take everything, all the valuables they possibly could and leave? That is a tactic of Trende Aragua. Now, Trende Aragua, if you go back and look at the history of Trende Aragua in the United States, and they are prolific in some states. Michigan is one of those states. They're out there robbing people, and they try to rob houses where no one's home. But there have been certainly a lot of instances where someone was home and they did come in. Now, here's the difference, though, between Trende Aragua and what happened here is I'm not aware of any cases with Trende Aragua where they have taken a victim out of the home and then for ransom and kidnapped somebody for ransom. That is not their style. It's not what they do. So that brings us back to, is this really Trende Aragua? Or, are they doing something new? And I know the cartel's been brought up several times. Is it potentially a cartel, situation? And quite honestly, we just don't know. Carl says 99% chance that it is a Mexican-made holster. I used to sell them when we had the gun shop. All I ever saw were made for revolvers. Does not mean this guy didn't shove a semi-auto in it. Yeah, I just don't know. And a lot of people were saying that was a cartel hold where this guy has his weapon. I can bring that photo back up. And then that theory was debunked, and they said that's actually not true, that this is just really weird, that this is just not how people carry weapons. So we just don't know. Now, I will tell you, I've seen a lot of other video in Nancy's neighborhood where there are other people in backpacks running around to different people's houses. And, apparently Tucson, like many other cities, they have a homeless population. They have people in their city who are drug addicts, who are out on the streets doing a lot of nefarious things. And I just watched a video last night, and I don't think it's this guy. It could be. I don't think it is. But there was another guy who on the same night, and I don't think it could be the same person because it coincided. Matter of fact, it happened at the exact same time, which is also just weird. It was on the February 1st, like early that morning at, I think it was like at 1 a.m., something along those lines. There was another guy with a backpack running around, caught on a neighbor's video. He was about 5 miles from Nancy. And that guy, he had on a backpack. He was in somebody's garage trying to open their gate to get into their backyard. He could not successfully get in. And that guy had 2 backpacks. One that, didn't look too different than this backpack, but I don't think they were the same. And then they also found a ski mask yesterday. I believe that was yesterday or the day before. I know it would have been yesterday after the show, somewhere a couple miles from Nancy's house. So we don't know if that's yet related or not. I've not heard much about that ski mask. So let's see. Carl says the holster has a very recognizable design. Yeah, I believe that everything this guy is wearing has been identified. The backpack coming from Walmart, and people have identified the jacket. There's a lot of information that has been identified. So why, Mary said that there is a white tent up right now outside of Nancy Guthrie's home. I do not know what's happening. Typically, when you have a white tent like that, it could be that a lot of people have been speculating that her body is still in the house. Now, that can happen, and I think that has happened in another case I've been following. I think the family stashed the body in the home. Investigators never looked up in the crawl space, and I did verify, not this case, a different case. And I think that's why another person's family member wasn't found right away, because they did stash the body in the home. And that crime, I do believe, was committed by a family member. In this case, I don't know, but investigators do have have talked a lot about how, they keep seeing this male on foot walking between Nancy's house and Annie's house. They haven't identified that male. They haven't said it's this same guy that we're seeing in these photos or on that video clip, but they have been continuously searching homes and asking people for any video footage they have of a man on foot walking between those two houses. And when you see this guy in both photos, he's coming around that same side, which would be coming from that same direction. Now, a white tent in front of somebody's house in a crime scene can be a lot of different things. I see it happening when they find a body. They usually do have a white crime tent up, but it could be just they're collecting more evidence. It's possible that they got a hit on these gloves, or maybe if they recover the mask, maybe they got a hit on that. They could be back in the house looking for more DNA evidence. So they're staging something there if that's the case. Mary, I don't know because I'm on here, so I don't know. We'll find out when the show's over here in just a moment. And Carl says, let's see here. Oh, Carl, I read that already. And so I don't know. We're just going to have to, like every other story, we're just going to have to keep an eye, see if there's any new developments. My speculation is the photo of that person, that it's either two people on the same nights or one person on two different nights. There has to be a reason why that investigators are looking for neighbors to have footage on January the 11th. So something was seen on January the 11th, whether it was on Nancy's camera, a neighbor's camera, we just don't know. But, I was really, really heavily believing that this had something to do with the family, not necessarily Annie and Tommaso or even her children. It could be somebody intermediate, her circle around her, somebody who knows the housekeeper, somebody who knows the gardener, somebody who knows the pool person, just somebody in that general circle. People who know the house have been in the house. But then we have that possibility where it could literally be either just some random stranger that happened to get familiar with Nancy's home. Maybe they've seen her coming out. If this person was on foot, it could be the child of somebody who lives in one of these houses. I know there was a Facebook group that reported that one of Nancy's neighbors had an adult son that had a criminal record, and the son was staying with her. It could be a situation like that. I mean, there's just a bazillion different possibilities. We could speculate all day long on who this, potential person could be, or what their motive is. And again, we are not getting a full picture from investigators. We don't know if anything was taken from the home. Of course, on initial inspection, like we said yesterday, immediately they knew this was a crime scene. Immediately they called in homicide detectives. So there was something within that house that they saw that led them to believe this was a homicide. And I can guarantee you that was not the fact that Nancy wasn't there. That is not why people call in homicide detectives, just because someone's not there. There was something inside that house, and I believe it was blood evidence, that told them that this is very likely a homicide. So I think investigators have kept some things very close to the vest. They're not releasing everything to the public, as they shouldn't, as they should not. They've got to keep some things to themselves. And Joe Adams, the tent should have been done on day one. I agree, Colonel Adams. They should have done it on day one. But like we talked about Colonel Adams yesterday on the show, there was a lot of things that should have been done on day one that weren't done. They should have walked those streets, as many resources as they have. I hear they have hundreds of FBI agents in town. They should have walked those streets. They should have found those gloves already, unless it's a situation where this person is taunting them and running around throwing out gloves, which I doubt. They need to find out what's taking place. They should have done it on day one. They should have searched every inch of Nancy's property. We don't even know, does she have a crawl space? Are there any nooks and crannies inside her home? Because think about that. If this person is indeed on foot, if they are indeed on foot, then you've got to believe that Nancy is somewhere nearby. Now, they did confiscate Nancy's vehicle. They did seize Nancy's vehicle. It's possible that they were on foot and they used Nancy's vehicle. Either way, guys, I have got to run. Work is calling. I've got lots to do today. If there's any additional information, which I believe there will be, I think today is going to be a very big day. I think that we'll give an update on it tomorrow. And outside of that, I hope you guys all have a great day. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. And of course, I'll be updating everything, other news stories as well, on my social media pages. I hope you guys have a great day. We'll have an update on the Nancy Guthrie case in the morning. Probably lots of significant updates between now and then. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.